right, it's a very simple song. The name of the song is Yahweh. We're going to lift the name of Yahweh all over this place. And we need you to just get out of your chair, get on your feet, and scream the name of Yahweh. Hallelujah. Come on, y'all. Come on. Clap. 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 Real simple. It goes like this. Yahweh.
Shalom, shalom, shalom. I am Rabbi James Byers, and I'm going live streaming through Messianic Lamb Radio. And we'd like to say thank you to those who are sponsoring us this evening. And as well, if you care to make a donation to them, just go to their website, Messianic Lamb Radio, and press donation. As well, I am rabbi for Melo HaGoyim. We are located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. If you're ever in the Triad, please stop by and visit us. Our address is 229 West Acadia Avenue, and you're more than welcome to join us any given Sabbath. As well as if you'd like to visit our website, right here in the bottom left, you can see melohagoyim.org. melohagoyim.org. Just leave off Learning Center. And so that's who we are. Once again, located in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And so I am so happy and excited to be with you this evening. And so let's kind of get rolling with our topic for this evening. And it is sitting on the seat of Moshe or Moses. So what I want you to do, grab your scriptures if you want to, but I will have them here for you. And as I move about, you'll be able to follow along, or just simply follow me as I move through. Follow me as I move through the scriptures here. And so hopefully you can see my screen well enough, and I have my pointer here, so we're going to move on. All right, here we go. Sitting on the seat of Moses, part two. All right, so let's jump right in and begin to break this down as to what questions we may have coming at us. And remember that you can join us live streaming. You can make your comments live, and I'm going to adjust my screen a bit where I can see your comments. So just give me a second. While I open up the comments page. All right. Now, how it is presented. And going to my comments page once again. All right, so it's not working at the moment. But anyway, if you have any comments you care to give or ask any questions, please do. And we have, yes, there we go. We have the ability to see your questions or comments live. So, all right, here we go. Let's look at Matthew chapter 23, verse 8. But you do not be called rabbi. And so as we move through, we will discuss what is it that Yeshua meant in Matthew's chapter chapter 23, verse 8. And this is basically where most commentaries or questions begin and end. And so a lot of times people are not versed on the next scriptures. And so hopefully what I'm seeing on my end is not affecting you on your end. And what I'm seeing actually is my screen is kind of going in and out, but I'm going to continue to move through. Hopefully that's not disturbing too much. And again, I do have capacity for live questions and answers. All right, here we go. So the question should be now, what does Yeshua mean when he says, oh, great. So what I see here, we can see perfect. Excellent. We got a response. What does Yeshua mean when he says, you do not be called rabbi? Now, when you start here, you have to have a question as to what he meant, because in the scriptures, there's 15, the rabbi or the title rabbi is used 15 different times, and they're not all belonging to Yeshua. But you have John, who is also called rabbi. You have Paul, who is also called rabbi. And so others who not by name that were called rabbis and different ones. And so let's begin to really go into this and see if we can get a bit of information on it to help us along. So what I've done is I have put this into an analogy of cultural traditions, social norms, if you will. And so we have verse 8 and 10, verse 9 and 10, verse 8 I've already read. Now I'm reading verse 9 and 10. So father, he says, call no man father on earth. And then also verse 10, he says, call no man leader. So you have three examples of what Yeshua used to help us along with his instructions. Call no man rabbi, for one is your rabbi, Yeshua. Call no man on earth father, for one is your father, Yahweh in heaven. Call no man leader, for one is your leader, Yeshua. And so as we look at this, let's start with father and leader. I put them in categories so that we can begin to ask the question, is it that Yeshua was saying no one is to use the title of rabbi? Let's begin our examination with verse 9. Verse 9 says, call no man on earth father. So, rabbi is a spiritual leader or guider. Father is your moralistic guider. He guides the family. He is the head of the family. And leader can be a leader of your community, which is economically based as well. Your political heads, your bosses on the job. You get the picture. It's tied to a lot of times your economic well-being. So if he's talking about titles, then we need to examine all three areas. And let's begin by looking back at more than just rabbi, because titles, rabbi, your spiritual guidance, is also moreh, pastor, shepherd, bishop, evangelist. So all of these are different titles of religious order. And you can think of some more as well, teacher. So what does rabbi really mean? Rabbi means teacher. Moreh means teach. So if you get rid of rabbi, you also got to get rid of moreh, pastor, shepherd, bishop, evangelist, all of the spiritual titles that are biblically based, titles of spiritual leaders, our social norms, cultural traditions. We must get rid of all of them. So, rabbi is your noun, whereas moreh is your verb. And so many people have found a way around using the title of rabbi by using moreh. So a lot of our folks or our brothers who are coming into the Messianic walk or the Hebrew lifestyle, coming into the Hebrew life with Torah base, are calling themselves or taking the title of moreh, which means teach. Now, if that means teach, then do we stop at just male genders? When you have both females and males, teachers of every sort, whether you're talking about educational, public system, private system, they teach, and therefore you call them teachers. So if a teacher teaches, then they are the equivalent of teacher. Father. Now, this is where I really draw the question as to, can we leave it at titles? We must question, is Yeshua at this point speaking against the titles when he says, call no man father on earth? One is your Father which is in heaven, Yahweh. So if there is no father, then there's also no mother. So we have taken away the whole family structure. We get rid of all the titles of moms and dad. And so I know some of you say, well, I don't call my father father. I call my father dad or daddy or, any other affectionate name that you call them by, which is a title. It is not a name. Every father has an independent name as to fathers of what sons or daughters, grandfathers, we have grandmothers, we have uncles, aunts. So the whole family structure is involved in call no man on earth father, because if there's no fathers, there's no mothers. Here's one observation we can make without question. If there's no mothers, then there can be no fathers. There can absolutely be no father other than Yahweh himself on earth, because no father can be a father without a mother. And this is speaking of mother of your children. And so it ceases or brings the cycle of the family unit to a halt. And so can we really say that Yahweh, Yeshua, is talking about fathers as it pertains to the family unit? Let's examine one more before we leave here, which is verse 10, leader. Our leaders can be political heads. They can be Each of these are interactive with rabbi, father, and leader, because one can be all of these, but we're looking at each one individually to examine the cultural norms. And so every culture has fathers and mothers. And so whatever, linguistic title it is, it still refers to mother and father, sisters and brothers. And so the whole family unit is destroyed if we can say, call no man on earth father. And so as we look at this, I think we can really appreciate that Yeshua, he brings out these three categories that are all independent, but yet they spiral together. And so if you would put this on a Venn diagram, they all come together at one point. Now, so that's if you're using fathers or the male figure, but we also have to include mothers, the female figure in this. So leader. Now, are we really speaking about call no man leader on earth? Then the sin that happened in the garden, which caused man to now work for a living, we work for someone above us, which would be called our leader. Now, whether he is the president of a country, the chairman of the board, the leader of the community as senator, any political head, any community leader, whether it's just a civic block head, housing development, and you have the chairman or chairperson, which can be man or woman. Let's take it even a step further. What about our jobs? And so is he saying that you don't call your boss by a title? This is my boss, whatever name. This is whether it's male or female. Let's look at it from this point of view. You are going on a job interview, and you don't really ask if it's male or female when you enter into the place to be interviewed. You simply get your appointed time, you're there, you walk in, and you sit down across the desk from whether male or female. And you go through your resume, you have presented, you go through your experiences. And let's say this is a female and she says, do you think this is a good fit for you? And your comment can be, whatever you feel at the moment. But if you think you fit that job description, yes, I think I can do the company good. And there's an acceptance, there's an offer on the side of the job and acceptance on your side. Now, did you really consider whether it was male or female? Or did you consider whether it was a job that you thought would pay you enough to pay your bills, survive? Let's say you got your degree, you've gone to school, you came out with your PhD, your master's, or whatever have you that made you qualified for this job. You didn't really want to ask that person all of their background and can I have a man, please? But what you said was, I have the job? Yes, thank you. I will be available on Monday morning or whatever date you set, and you gladly went to that job, whether it's a female leader or a male leader. And you did not do what many have done with the title of rabbi. So if we stop at verse 8, 23 and verse 8, then we have to examine 23, verse 8, verse 9, and verse 10 to examine. Now, of course, you know, the Talmudine and rabbi that I am, I'm going to go into those scriptures and we're going to look at how it reads. Now, Matthew's chapter 23, verse 8 through 11. Let's look at the do nots. But you do not be called rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Messiah, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your father, he who is in the heavens. Neither be called leaders, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be called your servant. I want to remind you of the time Yeshua bent down to wash the disciples' feet. And he was showing them what? That he too will lower himself as a servant. But right here, he's fulfilling verse 11. But the greatest among you shall be your servant. And guess who was the greatest? Yeshua, Emmanuel among us. Let's continue. Matthew's chapter 19, verse 17. And he said to him, why do you call me good? No one is good except one, Elohim. But if you wish to enter into life, guard the commandments. All right, so let's examine titles. One asks, my good master, what shall I do to be saved? And he says, why call me good? Flip back to verse 16. Why call me good? No one good except one, Elohim. But this goes along with 4 chapters later, chapter 23, verse 11, verse 10, verse 9, verse 9, when he says, call no one father, right? And so right here, here's another good example where he says, why call me good? No one good except the Father. So I'm using the scriptures to challenge interpretation of scriptures. So in other words, I use scriptures to define scriptures. Likewise, when it says, call no man rabbi, for one is your teacher. Right there is the definition of rabbi. The definition of rabbi is teacher. And so that's verse 8, 23, verse 8. There's another meaning to rabbi, which means my great one, my great one. All right, so let's keep it moving. And let's get back to chapter 23 and begin at verse 1 through 4. And let's let the light, Yeshua, let's let him shine the light on the darkness of men. Then Yeshua spoke to the crowds and to his taught ones, saying, the scribes and the Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, whatever they say to you, to God, guard and do. But do not do according to their works, for they say and do not do. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders. But with their finger, they do not wish to move them. So what is it Yeshua is saying here? This is the subject matter that he's speaking of by the time he gets to verse 8, 9, and 10, and 11. you've left the subject. The subject is the Pharisees and scribes, they sit on the seat of Moses. What does he mean by that? The authority of Moses they take and use, but they themselves do not obey. How so? It says, therefore, whatever they say to you to guard, guard and do. Keep and do. This was so confusing some time ago, some years back, looking at it from a traditional point of view. What does he mean? Coming from the church's point of view, as myself was raised in traditional church, and this really it didn't make a whole lot of sense. You point the finger and then you say, do what they say do. And so then what is it he's saying? They're sitting on the authority of Moses. We are the descendants of Abraham, freed from slavery by Moses, giving the Torah or the law. And as we are now the guardians of the law, the Torah, let me say it this way. Today, they go even further than the scribes and Pharisees. You have many traditional teachers who say we are no longer under the law, but we are under grace. So therefore, the law is no more relevant to us today. We are under grace. What a mistake. A big mistake. Let me say it like this. Try this. If you fly in an airplane, you don't want to jump out without a parachute or any apparatus to fly, because the airplane is in total harmony with the expanse that was created on the second day. Let there be an expanse between the earth and the heavens. Air. Let there be air between the earth and the heavens, or the water, which on the third day you have dry land and then vegetation. But Yahweh created a space where we can live and breathe. And so if you jump out of an airplane, which is in complete harmony with the air flying, then the law of gravity will take over and death will overtake you. Now, I suggest you don't try that without a parachute. So, is the law still in place? Oh, yes. But we're not going to argue the law and grace right here at this point. We're going to continue with the subject matter, which is sitting on the seat of Moses. And I really want to drive that point. On the seat of Moses means the authority of Moses. But according to their works, they say but do not do. Now, would you say that's a problem? I think it is, because what it shows is a lack of understanding or disobedience on their part. And it says, for they bind heavy burdens. So they take the law and they bind them with heavy laws, man-made laws. In other words, they take the law and they build what's called fences around the law so you don't get to the law to break the law. In other words, Talmudic teaching, when the word comes out of Yahweh's mouth, God's mouth, it is given to the rabbis to interpret, the Talmudim to interpret, and once it leaves God's mouth, then the rabbi or the Talmudic teachings teaches. Now, this is not the Torah. This is oral law, oral tradition. Okay. It is no longer up for God to interpret, but man as teachers or rabbis to interpret through the Mishnah. There's about 5 different books on oral law that says things like, if you drag a chair across the floor on the Sabbath, you have plowed a field. Therefore, you have broken the Torah or the law. If you turn on the light on the Sabbath, you have ignited a flame. Therefore, you have caused a flame to ignite the fire of Yahweh on the Sabbath. So when you look at these are fences that says don't do this. So what they do is they will build things around the Torah to not break it. So how do they turn on the light? They have automatic timers. Things like this to get around breaking the Torah or the law. And so people who can't afford to buy timers or things to set up their whole house or even to cook in the wintertime, notice that it gets dark quicker. And so you have to eat before it gets dark, or you break Torah because you turned on your oven or the burner to ignite a fire or a flame. Now, let me really explain that, which is talking about the anger of Yahweh. And so if you keep it to the simple terms of what Yahweh says, then we are better off than what the scribes and Pharisees have done to write laws to fatten up the law or put a fence around it so that you don't break the law. And so this is what Yeshua did when he said that they sit on the seat of Moses, but whatever they say do, you do. But for them, they bind heavy burdens, but they themselves do not lift a finger to keep the laws that they have written. So let's move on and continue with asking the question. So here's the big question. Are we talking about titles, which brings entitlements? And so you have scribes, you have Pharisees, you have Pharisees, scribes, and the different religious heads. In traditional church, you have the bishop, you have the pastor, you have the chairman of the board, you have the deacons, you have all of the religious heads that come with some type of prestige, position, entitlement. So the big question is it that he's talking against titles, or is it the hypocrisy of men? The hypocrisy of men. And what do I mean? Let's examine. When he said, they themselves do not lift a finger, he's speaking basically of what they are holding others to, but they themselves are not willing to do. Now, this is Yeshua speaking. And so as he speaks concerning the Pharisees and the scribes and so on, we can see it also in the church. You have the bishop, and then the head of bishops and whatever, leading authorities over your bishops, and then you have the Pope, you have all of those entities, you have the priest, you have every level of entitlement or every level of titles. And so according to your title, you look for certain privileges due to you. Whether someone is your armor bearer, carrying your Bible, or which comes from really from David being a army bearer. You know what I'm talking about. Yeshua called them hypocrites 8 times in Matthew chapter 23. But I found the title 15 times rabbi was used, and not only to Yeshua. And so if we can label what Yeshua is saying to all men, no one is to be called rabbi, then no one is to be called father on earth. You have to give the same degree to verse 9 and 10. No man leader. And so if we calling no man leader, then we have to also admit that we have, going back to father, we have both mothers and fathers. You can't have a father without having a mother. And so if we have fathers and mothers, then are we really talking about only men are qualified to teach Torah, teach the law? Then you have to go back in the scriptures and take away people like Deborah, who was a judge over Israel and taught Torah. The prophetess, we had the prophetess that Isaiah also had a child by. So we have to go to the different ones, Hannah, different ones who are praying, intercessory prayer, all of these different women who were praying. The scripture says, call no, my child, don't forget the Torah of your mother. My son, don't forget the Torah of your father. And so we have, even in the family unit, we have the teaching of the Torah, and it's not just, pertaining to religious communities, because now you got to also go into school. And don't forget that a lot of the teachers were women teachers. Go back in history and you will verify that the predominant teacher in the school system were women, even as it is today, that your predominant teacher are women, or teachers are women. And so we have to examine all of these titles if we throw away rabbi, father, and leader. Now, here's one more point. Let's remember Shemuel, or Samuel, the judge. Yahweh said to Samuel when he was picking the king, which is another title, he said, Samuel, give them, Israel, what they asked for. They said, we want a king like all of the other nations. Yahweh said, don't worry. They're not rejecting you, Samuel. They're rejecting me from being king to them. And so the first king was picked, Saul, second king, David, and then Solomon, the third king, and so on. You see many kings thereafter. So if he was getting rid of the titles, then there should be no king as well. So let's continue. Let's look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 4, and look at a sign of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Jonah, his Hebrew name. And he left them and went away. Chapter 12, verse 54 through 56. And he also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising out of the west, immediately you say, a storm is coming. And so it is. And when you see the south wind blow, you say, there shall be hot weather. And it is. Hypocrites. He called them hypocrites. And so not only right there in chapter 23, 8 times he was calling them hypocrites. Here's another witness where he says, you know to discern the face of the heaven and of the earth. But how is it you do not discern this time? So what time is it? Here's the sign of the time. Yeshua. There was a sign of Yeshua's coming since the prophets, since the giving of the Torah or the law at Mount Sinai when they came out of Mizraim or Egypt. And they said, all that you say we will do, right? And so to this day, we have what is called what? The 10 Commandments. And so many people will say we are no longer under the law, not realizing that the 10 Commandments, they are the origins of the law. And so looking at verse 4, Matthew chapter 16, verse 4, when he says, this is a wicked and adulterous generation. That's what he's calling them at this point and time. He says, no sign is going to be given to you except this one, the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left it right there. So what is the sign of the prophet Jonah? 3 days, 3 nights in that order. And for a very specific reason, because when he said 3 days and 3 nights, that order is how he's giving it to us so that when we go back to creation and you say, well, he said in the beginning, right? In the evening and then in the morning is the first day, right? And so right here, he's saying 3 days and 3 nights. There can be a controversial argument with that as to, well, was it in the evening or was it in the day? And so I won't really go into that right now, but for those of you who understand the Passover and how to interpret the timeline, this is very important. That's all I'm going to say right here. Now, 3 days and 3 nights. Got to stick with that. So, Luke chapter 12, let's understand what he's saying. Now, you have been told that I was coming. You've been given the signs of the season, prophecy after prophecy after prophet, but the problem is you've been killing the prophets and you have been getting rid of the prophecies. And so how is it that you can predict the time? You can look at the clouds and say it's going to be raining, snowing, hailing, hot weather. How is it that you can predict weather? And so we know that that is true today. They can predict hurricanes, tornadoes, rain, sleet, snow, every type of weather they can predict. But you can't predict the coming of the son of Adam. You don't know when he's coming. And so like that generation, he says, you are a wicked and adulterous generation who seeks after a sign. And the only one that I'm going to give you is that I will be raised on the 3rd day. And so we don't want to be like that generation. We have been 2,000 years since Yeshua, and he said he's going to return. And so he has given us signs and wonders so that we should know when he will come and when to expect him. And so here we are, Matthew chapter 23, verse 33 through 36. Let's continue to look and see what John said about this generation. Serpents brood of adders, serpent, brood of adder is children of snakes. How would you escape the judgment of Gehenna? How would you escape the judgment of hell? Because of this, see, I send you prophets and wise men and scholars of the scriptures. Some of them you shall kill and impale. Some of them you shall flog in your congregations and persecute from city to city, so that on you should come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel, to the bloodshed of Zechariah the prophet, son of Barachiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar, the dwelling place and the slaughter place. Truly I say to you, all this shall come upon this generation. So the generation that was alive to receive Yeshua in his coming will at that time, all of the bloodshed, the prophets who were killed off, all of this Israel, he said, I'm gonna lay their blood on this generation. And so these were the Pharisees, the scribes, and the rulers were trying to get down to John to be baptized, or mikvah as it is called in the Hebrew, to be submerged in water so that they are clean and escape the judgment that is to come. And so we know that the Lamb is there for that reason, that he is in his two appearances. He fulfills the first one, which is to come as a lamb and to be slain. And so here's the Lamb speaking to that generation and saying, you're trying to escape. John is saying when he saw them, you are here to escape. Who told you to try to escape? But you will not. And so Yeshua, the judge, he will come back as the lion, which is representation or symbol of king. He will judge all people, all nations, right? By Torah, by the law. And so when people teach that we're no longer under the law, again, a big mistake. And so right here, it says, I send you prophets, title, wise men, title, scholars of the scriptures, title, but you killed them. You persecuted them from city to city. And so the blood that you have shed is now applied to your hands. And so Israel did this, and those who were out for filthy gain rather than righteousness. Let's continue. Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 15. And I shall give you pastors according to my heart, which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. So right here again, I shall give you, who's speaking? Well, this is one of the prophets. Pastors, I shall give you pastors. What is the meaning of pastor? Shepherd. The meaning of pastor is to shepherd. But God is saying, Yahweh is saying, according to my heart, and they shall feed you with what? Knowledge and understanding. And so here is a comment. Shalom, Walt. Shalom, MXG. Amazing, he calls them a generation of vipers in comparison of all the prophets murdered, starting with Abel, who was struck down by Cain. You are so right. So I'm gonna bring that up so that you see what one of the ministers, Minister Walt Arthur, said that this generation he called vipers. They murdered others just as Cain did his brother Abel. And so here's the heavy of that, where he is now going to lay all of that blood going all the way back to Cain and Abel, all the way back to the prophets. He's going to lay all of that blood at your feet. That's heavy. You don't want to be in that position. Now I'm going to see if I can get back. Excellent. All right. Learning to use these controls. All right. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 10 through 14. He who went down is also the one who went up far above all the heavens to fill all. And he himself gave some as emissaries, some as prophets, and some as evangelists, and some as shepherds and teachers. There it is. For the perfecting of the set apart ones, to the work of service, to a building up of the body of the Messiah, until we all come to the unity of the belief and of the knowledge of the Son of Elohim, to a perfect man. Whoa! To the measure of the stature of the completeness of Messiah, so that we should no longer be children. He wants to mature us, tossed and borne about by every wind of teaching, by the trickery of men in cleverness, unto the craftiness of leading astray. And remember how he said we would be led astray in this day and time. And because they asked, they pointed to him, see the temple, and he said, see, there shall be not one stone left upon another. And so he said that many of you would be led what? Astray. And so right here we see where he says, I've given you these titles, these men who would teach you in knowledge and understanding. So if you take away your rabbis, your pastors, your emissaries, your prophets, your evangelists, first of all, you don't have the authority to do that. When Yeshua, this is who's speaking, I have given you this. Who has the authority? Call no man rabbi except one, Messiah, Yeshua, right? So now he says, now I send you. Let's look at it again. He who went down is also the one who went up. So he died and did what? Went up far above the heavens to fill all. And he himself gave. Who is he himself? Yeshua gave some as emissaries, some as prophets. You know what I'm saying? To do what? To the work of service, to build up of the body of Messiah. Who's the Messiah? Yeshua. So this cannot be misinterpreted that if we are the body of Yeshua, he also sends teachers, leaders. He gives us fathers and mothers who would also teach us, right? The Torah, the law, right? For what purpose? To the perfecting of man. For the completeness in Yeshua. So that we should no longer be tossed about as children, understanding the Torah or the law, no longer being borne about by every wind of doctrine and teaching, by the trickery of who? Men. So can we say these are still the extension of men who call themselves rabbis, Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, the craftiness of men. Now you have bishop, pastor, evangelists, shepherd, and so the list goes on. Pastors, what I'm speaking of. And so the misinterpretation, here's the number one. To say that we are no longer under the law is the biggest mistake you'll ever want to make. Moving on. Hallelujah. All right, so all right, here we go. Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 5 through 10. Cursed is the man. Let's look at this. What I want to give you now, this may surprise you. This is what Yeshua was quoting. Remember, Yeshua is the incarnate Torah. He is the living word. He is the walking, talking Torah, the law. And let's see, what law did he go back to when he spoke in Matthew 23, saying, call no man rabbi, father, leader. Verse 5. Thus said Yahweh, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes man's flesh his arm, and whose heart turns away from Yahweh. So right here is the law that says, call no man father on earth. Why? Because if you put your trust in your bishop, your pastor of every title, your rabbi of every title, your father of every title, mother, aunt, uncle, every title. And remember, we have problems when it comes to the family unit. And so when you start getting rid of the law, and it is the law that no son uncovers his father's what? Wife, daughter, his father's sister, his father's. So it goes down the list, right? Why? Because these are the family units. And so if you uncover the father's nakedness, or you uncover the father's wife, you uncover your mother. And so this is sin. And so that sin, we can see with today's generation, and it doesn't stop here, nor did it start here, but we see where men go to jail for incest, whether it's the son, sister, father, daughter, son, mother, in intervening in the family units, and the sons are going back into the family unit, is called incest, right? So let's finish this. For he shall be like a shrub in the desert, and not see when good comes, and shall inhabit the parched places in the wilderness, a salt land that is not inhabited. And so when he says cursed in the man, so there's a scripture where he says, count this man childless. There was a king, yes, and I'm trying to think of his name, but anyway, a king who married his brother's wife. He took his brother's wife, and so Yahweh said of that king, write this man childless. And so Yahweh took away their ability to have children. And so that's Philip, and I'm getting one of the names, but you know who I'm talking about, what I'm talking about. And so he says, cursed is the man who puts his trust in man. So rabbi, father, leader, if you put your trust in these people above Yahweh, cursed is the man. He says, and make flesh his arm. Because remember, he says, I have saved Israel with what? An outstretched arm. But what you're doing here is you're making flesh your arm, and you're taking man, whether you're taking the rabbi of every title, male or female, pastor, male or female, bishop, male or female. And so while I'm not really digging into this, once you really go into this, you got to understand that in Yeshua, there's neither male nor female. And so I'll get back to this momentarily. But when you open up these titles, if you're going to lean towards title, there is no father, period, except for Yahweh, without mothers. So you can scratch fathers if you get rid of men as fathers. Now, let me stay with the scripture at hand. The second bullet says, blessed is the man who trusts in Yahweh and whose trust is Yahweh. Look at that. Right there is reversed. He reversed. Cursed is the man who trusts in man, but blessed is the man whose trust is Yahweh. This agrees with Matthew's chapter 23, verse 9. Call no man on earth father except one in heaven, Yahweh. Blessed is the man whose trust is Yahweh and whose trust is Yahweh, for he shall be like a tree planted by the waters, which spread out its roots by the river, and does not see heat come. And his heat shall be green, and in the year of drought he is not anxious. Wow! Nor does he cease from yielding fruit. The heart is crooked above all and desperately sick. Who shall know it? I, Yahweh, search the heart. I try the kidneys and give every man according to his work, according to the fruit of his deed. Hallelujah. Woo! This is good. Let's look at, let's go back to Walt. He says, Herod took his brother's wife, John the Baptist. That's it. Thank you. And so when Herod took his brother's wife, and remember that the gift was the head of John, right? You know the story. And so to get rid of John, I called Philip a few minutes ago, and so that was incorrect there. And so thank you, Walt, for looking that up for me. So we have Herod, who took his brother's wife, who was still alive. And so when John went against it using the Torah, you know what? He said, you know what? We got to get rid of it. So when the daughter, the wife, daughter danced, he said, name your gift. And she said the head, which was coached by the mother of John. And so thank you, sir. Thank you. All right, so let's look at the two, and we're going to move on from there. So when he says, blessed is the man whose trust in Yahweh, whose trust is Yahweh, he shall be like what? A tree planted by water. So what you have is creation here. You have water and you have earth. Once again, it is doing what it was told to do from the very beginning of time, from the very beginning of creation. Both earth and water produced vegetation, and the cycle continues. And so instead of being like a shrub in the desert, not knowing when good comes, or in search of water, you shall be, if you put your trust in Yahweh, you shall be like a tree planted by water. And he says, the heart is crooked above all and desperately sick. And this is for those of you who say, and God knows my heart. He knows my heart. Right here is your answer. The heart is sick. We have to stay with Yahweh. Moving on. We're nearing, we're in good time, but we're nearing our end. And so Jeremiah 17, we've done. Let's move on. Okay, I got to bring my, okay, there we go. Let's look at Proverbs chapter 3, verse 1 through 7, looking at the wisdom of Torah. The wisdom of Torah, or the law. My son, do not forget my Torah, and let your heart watch over my commands, for length of days and long life and peace they add to you. So what adds the length of days to you and peace? Torah. We got to go back to the subject matter. Right here. My son, do not forget my Torah. They do what? They add the length of days and peace to you. So, do you think we need the law today when there's war and rumors of war? Well, it adds length of days. Do you think that this is why the wise went in with Messiah when he returned? Because he's going to fulfill the proverb right here, for length of days and long life and peace they add to you. So how will the Messiah fulfill this? Remember, when Yeshua returns, that the five wise, they go in, and then the door is shut, and the foolish are shut out, where there is weeping and gnashing of teeth. So that's not peace. That's not peace. But those who go in, because they are what? Ready, length of days and long life, as well as peace, are added to you. Let not loving commitment and truth forsake you. So in other words, he's not obligated to you, because if you do not keep the Torah, or the law, above all things, this is why he says, call no man on earth above all Messiah, Yeshua. No man rabbi, for one is your teacher, Yeshua. So above all is Yeshua. Above all is Yahweh. So why do you say Yeshua and then you say Yahweh? Because Yeshua is Yahweh and Yahweh is Yeshua. The word became flesh and it dwelt among us, right? So John 1:1, verse 14. So it says, bind them around your neck, write them on the tablets of your heart. Oh, that sounds like the new covenant, or the renewed covenant, which will be fulfilled when Yeshua comes. So in other words, Jeremiah 31 and 31 through 34 is not completely fulfilled yet. And people think that it is, but it is not, because here's how I can say it is not emphatically. No one will say to his neighbor, know Yahweh, for they all know me. That is not fulfilled. We are still saying, know God, know Yahweh, know Yeshua, know Yahweh, right? So as long as we teach people to know the Torah, to know the law, or to accept his Messiah, the blood-slain lamb, as long as we are witnesses to that, then this have not yet been fulfilled. Now, thus finding favor and good insight in the eyes of Elohim and man. Trust in Yahweh with all your heart, and lean not to your own understanding. Know him in all your ways, and he makes all your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear Yahweh and turn away from evil. Turn away from evil. All right. Let me see if I can fix this a little bit more. Okay, there we go. That's what I'm looking for. All right, so continuing on. All right, let's ask this question. Would Yahweh or Yeshua break Torah? Would Yahweh break his own law? Would the Son, Yeshua, break the law of the Father? Matthew chapter 5, verse 19. Now, remember in verse 17, he says, I did not come to destroy the law or the prophets, right? But to bring it to a greater understanding or the fulfillment, right? Which is a greater understanding. Verse 19 says, whoever then breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches men so shall be called least in the reign of the heavens. So let's look at that first. Yeshua says, whoever teaches men that we are no longer under the law shall be called least in the reign of heavens. When you look up that word least, it means not. So right away we have a problem. So it agrees with Matthew's chapter 25, where it says, the kingdom of heaven shall be as 10 virgins, 5 are foolish and 5 are wise. And when you know the story. So when the wise went in, the door was shut, and realized those who went out to purchase more oil because they didn't have enough oil to light their lamps, they had to go and buy from those who sold on the Sabbath. Now we have a problem, a huge problem. In the Torah, Leviticus chapter 23, he gives us the Sabbath, which is the seventh day. Then he tells us to keep the holy days, which there are 7 of them, and each of them has its own independent law concerning it. But he starts out, these are the Sabbath of Yahweh. And so starting with the 7th day Sabbath, which is a weekly Sabbath, followed by the listing of annual Sabbaths that we keep. Now, in one of those, which is the 7th one of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7th of those 7, starts with a Sabbath. Now, Passover is not a Sabbath, so it does not start with a Sabbath. But Sukkot starts with a Sabbath. And not using man's calendar, but the Hebrew calendar, whatever day it starts, whether it's on a Wednesday, a Friday, a Tuesday, a Sunday, it doesn't matter. But whatever the first day of the annual Sukkot, Tabernacles, Feast of Ingathering, whatever day that starts on, it's a Sabbath. And it goes back to creation. In the evening and then in the morning is the first day, and I'm going to use this, of Sukkot. Because on the calendar, the first day of Sukkot is the 15th. But you start in the evening of the 14th. And so, let's go on to the second part. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great in the reign of the heavens. And so to be called great in the reigns of heavens, I'm going to give another example. Remember, I think this was James and the sons of Zebedee, I think it was. And forgive me, I'm having to try to recall. And so on the spot, sometimes I don't recall all the names, but the sons of Zebedee, the wife said, Messiah, choose which one of my sons would be greatest to be seated with you. Please give them a seat. And Yeshua denied that and said, that's basically paraphrasing, that's not for me to do right here. But he wasn't denying them. What he was saying was, whoever teaches the Torah or the law shall be called great, shall be great in the kingdom of my Father. Here's another example. Remember when Peter, when Yeshua began to wash the feet of the disciples, the called ones, and Peter said, Master, not I. You shall not wash my feet. And Yeshua looked at him and said, if I don't wash your feet, then you will have no part with me in my Father's kingdom to come. And so Kiefer thought about it, and he said, not only, and I'm cutting it short, not only my feet, but my head, my hands, all of me, basically. So when he understood what Yeshua was saying, then he was okay with it. But remember when Miriam began to wash Yeshua's feet with her hair. Oh, so there was one, Judas, he had complained about the oil that she used was costly, and she used her hair and her tears to wipe the feet of Yeshua, and doing so, she showed herself as a what? A servant. So here's a woman who did not cease to wash his feet, and he showed this against the men who was there and said, not one of you have done this, and she have not ceased to wash my feet. Why? She was preparing me for what? My burial. Here it is. Yeshua prepared Kepha to follow him. Here's another question. Where is it that you're going that we can't go right now? He says, you're going, but not right now. You can't go where I am going, but at another time. And so this was puzzling as to where is it that you're going? Is he going out to teach and we can't go? Or where is he going? They didn't understand that he was about to die and be sacrificed, but he would be raised on the third day, and they would be my witnesses. And so there's so much here that I can get into, but I'm going to keep it short because we're almost out of time. And so I'm hoping desperately that you're beginning to understand how Yeshua came to fulfill the Torah, not bring it as to an end, completeness, but to a better understanding, completeness, right? And so let's examine this again. But whoever does and teaches them, teaches what? The law, the Torah. He shall be called what? Great. What is that teaches? My great one, Rabbi. So there are those of you who are many teachers of the Torah, many teachers of the scriptures, many teachers of the Brit or the New Testament. You're doing what he is saying, that you will become my witnesses to the uttermost parts of the earth, right? You're doing what he says do. You will be greater, you will do greater works, right? All right, so let's keep it moving. And bringing up my great one. So what is great one? My great one? Rabbi or teacher. There it is. He wasn't coming against titles. Continuing. Let's look at Yeshua being the clarifying light. Luke chapter 16, verse 14 through 17. And remember here that this conversation is three persons who are dead. You have Abraham, you have Eleazar, Lazarus, who have died at this point, and you have the rich man, some would call him David. And so the rich man, he asked Yeshua, excuse me, he asked Abraham, would you send your servant Eleazar, Lazarus, to bring some water and put it on my tongue? So he's trying to use him as a servant to come and put it on my tongue. And so what's being submitted to us is that this fire is so intense, so hot, that the thought of him coming with his finger just dipped in some water and the thought of him placing it on my tongue is a symbol of release. Can you imagine this? That the fire is so intense and death is no longer his. He can no longer die, because remember, we die once and we die, but we're raised to life eternal. Now, it depends on you, your life. You have lived to Torah. You have walked a life of righteousness, and you are able to escape the life of eternal flames. But there will be those of us who are alive when Yeshua returns for the 1,000-year reign, right? So we're not talking about the end of the earth yet, and all will die. For those who have not died once will be changed in the moment of the twinkling of an eye, right? So we're not talking about that. But what we are talking about is when Yeshua returns, there's going to be a meeting at the Mount of Olives where those who are ready go in to meet Yahweh, and that is right hand Yeshua. And so the renewed covenant will be given at that time, and the 144,000 will be given a white stone, and on that white stone will be a name, and on that white stone the name will be the gate of which he enters. In other words, 144,000 times it will be given, 12,000 to Reuben, 12,000 to Gad, Simeon, Naphtali, Levi, Judah, Issachar. So the 12 tribes, both the southern and the northern, will be reunited under Yeshua. And so the wise, and so let me tell you how easy that can be met. If you have one from every tribe, that's 12, right? All 12 tribes would be represented. But this is going to be 144,000, 12 times 12, or 12 times 1,000. So all tribes will be represented, and there will be portions from all 12 tribes. Go to Revelation chapter 7 and then chapter 14. You'll see what I'm talking about. So Luke 16, 14 through 17. I'm going to go ahead and completely read this. And it says, the Pharisees who love silver, here's the problem, also heard all this and were sneering at him. So he said to them, you are those who declare yourselves righteous before men, but Elohim knows your heart, because what is highly thought of among men is an abomination in the sight of Elohim. The Torah and the prophets are until Yochanan, John. Since then, the reign of Elohim is being announced, and everyone is doing violence upon it. And it is easier for the heaven and the earth to pass away than for one tittle of the Torah to fall. Let me ask this question. Is the earth still here? Is the heaven still here? And if that's the case, if we are still here, then this have not been fulfilled yet, because it says it is easier for heaven and earth to pass away than one one dot or the smallest character of the Hebrew letters to fail. But he says that the law was given at Mount Sinai and the prophets. All of this till the time of John, and he announces the high priest, which is Yeshua. Remember when he was when he said, "Look, here comes one whose feet I am sandals. I am not worthy to unlace his lashes, the laces." And so when he said this, what was he doing? He was going back to the Torah, right? And so in speaking the Torah, whose sandals are removed? The one who, if a woman, and I'm gonna see if I can get this out quickly because I did say it's coming from the Torah, so I have to explain. If a woman, thinking of Ruth, married 7 husbands, whose husband is she in the kingdom come? He says, none. Why? Because the kingdom to come, these are messengers and they have eternal life already. But in that day, those who are alive, they shall also be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. And so we shall be as one. So the angels or the messengers of heaven, they are eternal beings already. And then those of us who are alive at the time of this particular period, which is now after the millennial reign, we shall be translated or changed in a moment and a twinkling of an eye and become eternal beings. And so the final enemy will be defeated. Death and hell will be swallowed up. All right, so how does this take care of the law or Torah? Because I really jumped back to the Torah. I jumped back to New Testament, but now I'm going to go. I'm going to go to the Torah or law, where it says that if a woman's husband refuses to build her brother's house, she goes to the brother and say to the elders that he refused to build the brother's house, then she is to spit in his face, to slap his face, and then spit in his face and say to the elders that he refused to build his brother's house. And so what we see in this is the first brother, remembering how Judah, his sons, he had 3 sons, and the first 2 died, right? The second one, Yahweh said he was also evil, so he took his life. And then with Tamar, he did not give Tamar, so we have who was the 3rd son, and Tamar was supposed to get married. But the question was asked, well, to whom is she married? I'm really trying to condense and get down for time because I'm about to run out of time. So she said, to whom these items belong, I am pregnant. And Judah said, you're better than I. And remember, he gave his cord, his staff, and his signet ring, those 3 items. And he went into the harlot, who he thought was a harlot, right? But she only put on the clothes of a harlot so that it would be fulfilled by the next brother. And so when she did not get the next brother, it was really the father who thought she was a harlot fulfilled. So is this the father and son, Yeshua as the son, Yahweh really the father? And so we could see the same scenario taking place. And so as I am about to run out of time, I'm going to skip on through to my last slide, and we're going to close out with this one. Galatians chapter 3, verse 24 through 29. The scripture says, seek the old path. That's That's Tanakh, but here's Galatians. Therefore, the Torah became our trainer unto Messiah in order to be declared right by belief. So the law is not salvation. Belief, if you believe in Messiah, that is salvation. Yeshua is our salvation. But once you believe, belief is not enough, because remember, the demons also believe and they tremble. Belief is not enough. And after belief has come, there it is. Here it goes, the order. We are no longer under a trainer, for you are all sons of Elohim through belief in Messiah Yeshua. For as many of you as were immersed, baptized into Messiah, have put on Messiah. There is not Yehudi, Jew, nor Greek. There is not slave nor free. There is not male and female. For you are all one in Messiah Yeshua. And if you are of Messiah, then you are seed of Abraham and heirs according to the promise. According to the promise. What promise? Your heirs according to the promise that Yahweh gave to Abraham, that your seed would inherit a land, the promised land. And so please understand that the 400 years that he said, according to Genesis chapter 15, verse 13, has not been fulfilled, where he says, 400 years I will return your descendants to this land and give it to them. And so let's check and see how did this fare out. So some are teaching this was done when they came out of Egypt. They fulfilled 400 years by staying there 430 years, 30 years longer than they really needed to be. So the 400 years is covered. So what about the land? So he said the 400 years that your seed will go from the river Nile to Euphrates. That landmass has not been given yet. It has not been fulfilled. The little piece of land where Jerusalem, Israel is now, if you look at it, is nothing in comparison to what he says they will be given. And so I'm going to go ahead and close out right here. For those of you who have joined us tonight, once again, thank you so much in joining us, a little tongue-tied. And so once again, be blessed. And we will see you again on next week when there will be another teaching from Melo HaGoyim. I am signing out. Shalom.